half-sister and her husband are sitting in jail waiting to be sentenced. They refuse to admit anything despite all the evidence. This past year has been a real mess. Things I never expected to happen with my family, they happened. It started with my older half-sister from my dad's side. We weren't raised together a lot. My dad had her with another woman before he married my mom. Her mom couldn't handle her anymore because she was always getting into trouble. She even called the police on her a few times because she was mean and violent. Dad felt bad and paid for her bus ticket to come live with us. My dad was also super strict. He'd hit us with a belt if we did something wrong. I know that sounds harsh, and as a grown-up, I don't think it's okay to hit kids. But in our culture, it was pretty normal. My siblings and I got spanked a lot, too. When my half-sister came to live with us, things were cool at first. I was so excited to have a big sister, and we hung out all the time. She was in high school, which meant she was getting into some trouble like lying about her grades, skipping class to smoke weed, and getting into fights at school. My dad would try to get her to behave by grounding her, giving her lectures, and making her do extra chores. One time, she was grounded for over a month and couldn't leave the house except to go to school. But she never really stopped getting into trouble, she just got better at hiding it from my parents. For example, she'd tell my mom she had to go to school early or stay late for school stuff, but in reality, she'd go with her friends to smoke weed. It worked because she'd always get home before my dad got off work. Then one day everything blew up. My dad got off work early and said he'd pick her up from a school event. He saw her walking down the street with her friends going back into the school, and he knew there was no real school activity. He was really mad. After that, Dad got even stricter with her. He grounded her and didn't let her go to school early or stay late for anything, except if she was actually in trouble and had to stay for detention. My dad always called the school to make sure she was actually supposed to stay. You can imagine what happened next. One day, Dad completely lost it with her. He started by hitting her because all the other ways of punishing her didn't work. He yelled, pulled her hair, made her kneel on rice in a corner, and hit her with a belt. It was bad. Everything ended when Dad got really angry and hit her so hard with the belt that her back was bleeding, and her shirt stuck to the dried blood. She went to school with the bloody shirt on and told a friend what happened. Her friend told a teacher, and the teacher called the police and Child Protective Services. They took my half-sister and put her in foster care while they figured out what to do next. My dad got arrested for hitting her. But my dad is a good speaker and has a lot of education, so he pleaded no contest. He convinced the judge that he was a good guy and that my half-sister was always getting into trouble, so the judge gave him a light sentence. He spent one day in jail, his charges were reduced, and he just had to take classes to learn how to manage his anger. Things were weird with my half-sister over the years. It was like she went through periods of partying and using drugs and being sober. When she was sober, she'd come live with us for a couple of months, then she'd go back to her mom or her ex-boyfriend. Even though everything that happened, my siblings and I loved her, and we loved our nephew, and later nieces. When they came to visit, we had fun, but it was clear that my half-sister was a terrible liar. She would lie about the simplest things, like saying she had McDonald's for lunch when she really had Burger King. I just learned to ignore most of the things she told me because she was always making up stories. But that wasn't the end of the craziness. There was another thing that happened, something I didn't know about until a few months later, something my half-sister lied about and would make everything even worse. I knew my dad had been hiding something, but I never guessed it was this. It started when I was in my room doing my homework. I was 17 at the time, almost finished with high school, and my dad called me into his office. He always seemed serious when he called me in there. I had a gut feeling something was off. I went into his office, and he was sitting in his big chair looking like he wanted to say something but was too nervous. There were a lot of papers on the desk, and my dad looked so tense. I felt scared, confused, and curious. My mom was sitting there looking down, like she wanted to disappear. My dad said he needed to tell me something. He's been in the military for years and worked for the government after that, so he always seemed calm and collected. Seeing him act this way, like he was holding back tears, was not normal. It was like something really serious was happening. He was shaking, he kept looking at my mom. He mumbled, something like, "It's about your half-sister." I felt my heart beat faster. I wasn't sure why, but something told me it was serious. He paused, took a deep breath and then started talking about how my half-sister's ex had called the police. This is where my dad started to lie, but I didn't know it at the time. He explained to me that her ex said she was making up lies about him and said that he'd abused her. My dad's jaw was clenched and he looked pale. I remember him saying, "She keeps getting into trouble, we didn't think this was possible." My mom seemed so sad. I didn't understand it all, but it sounded like my half-sister was going through a tough time again, and that she was lying to people. My dad talked about how the cops were investigating and that they wanted to talk to us because it was our word against his, and we had to tell the cops everything that we knew about what happened. Then he told me how we didn't know what to do about this because he'd already been arrested for hitting her. We had no idea that my half-sister had gone to the cops and accused him of something else. I tried to take it all in, but it was like it all felt surreal, like a dream that felt too strange to be true. The truth is, there was something that my dad never told me that night, something my mom seemed to know and wanted to tell me. My dad seemed afraid to tell me the truth. He looked at my mom and shook his head as if asking her not to say anything. My mom seemed upset, and that made me think there was something wrong, that there was a secret. I needed to find out the truth. The next day I asked my mom if there was more to the story. My mom looked at me with sad eyes and said, "I'm sorry, sweetie, you can't know that. It's too dangerous, too risky, and your dad asked me to keep quiet. Just trust him for now. Your dad loves you, just don't talk to the police." It made me angry, but it also made me suspicious, making me want to find out the truth more than ever. I had a bad feeling. I kept asking my mom questions, but she refused to answer. She told me that it wasn't good for me to know. I asked my siblings, but they were all confused and said they didn't know anything. My sister started crying and said, "I want to find out the truth too, but Dad said we have to be quiet." That only made me more determined. My dad was lying and my mom seemed like she was in on it, but I was not going to be kept in the dark. It turns out my mom was right, finding out the truth was too dangerous, and that is why my dad didn't tell me what really happened. I had to be brave, I had to face my fears and discover what had happened. It started when a couple of my friends from school told me they'd seen my half-sister at a party, and she was acting crazy. They were like, "Did you know that she accused your dad of stuff?" I was stunned, I had no idea. They said they'd heard that my half-sister had accused my dad of sexual abuse, and she'd even said it was happening to my siblings too, and that we all were part of some weird cult. I couldn't believe it. I was scared, sad, confused, angry, and frustrated, all at the same time. How could she do this to us, to my dad, to my mom, and to our whole family? The thing that made me the most angry was that she was going around lying to everyone. I went back to my parents and asked my dad about what they'd been hiding, and my dad confirmed it. I confronted my dad, asked him about it. He was crying and told me everything he'd been hiding, told me how scared he was because he knew people were going to turn against us. It all made sense now. The way my mom acted, how she seemed so sad and afraid to tell me the truth, the way she tried to convince me to just trust him, it all clicked into place. Next story. My wife was jealous of her own best friend after the wedding. She accused me of siding with her friend and then, she started acting crazy and ignored all of our friends. My wife, Nancy, and I met in college, and we had been together for a long time before we got married. She was my best friend. We had so much fun together, and I loved her more than anything in the world. Our wedding day was amazing. We both had the time of our lives, surrounded by our friends and family. But that feeling didn't last very long because after the wedding, Nancy changed. It was like the person I knew and loved didn't even exist anymore. I've never felt so confused. Before the wedding, it was as if we could read each other's minds. But suddenly, I had no idea what was going on in her head, and it scared me. After the reception, things went downhill really fast. I had no idea this was how our marriage was going to start. Nancy had this big idea about having a talent show at our reception. She thought it would be fun for everyone, especially her close friends. She said that we should let our friends show everyone how awesome they were. She said it would help to create a fun and special feeling at our wedding. She told me she had written a poem to read and had encouraged her best friend, Kate, to perform a song for everyone at the wedding. She was very excited about it. It was like her entire focus was on making this event a success, and she got pretty demanding about the whole thing. I just wanted her to be happy, so I went along with it, even though I didn't know much about talent shows and thought it seemed a bit strange to have one at a wedding. I just figured it was Nancy's way of making things special, so I went along with her idea. It seemed harmless, I thought it would be fun for everyone, especially my wife. But what Nancy didn't know was that her little talent show would backfire in a way I never could have imagined. She didn't realize that her little talent show would end up destroying everything between us. On our wedding day, I was so happy. I wasn't even paying attention to the talent show, just enjoying my wedding day with Nancy. She seemed so happy, everything was so great, and I couldn't believe I was lucky enough to be her husband. After the wedding, while we were dancing and having fun with our friends and family, I saw Edward walking around and chatting with people. Edward was one of my best friends. He's a music producer and musician, but it's a side thing he does when he's not working at his office job. We had hung out with him and his fiancée many times and even had a football game at his place a few months before our wedding. He even had a recording studio in his basement. He really liked music. That night, I heard some people in the crowd saying that Kate's song was really good. I heard that Kate's voice was so clear and powerful. They seemed really impressed with her talent. She had always been musically talented, and I was so happy she shared that with everyone. She told me that she really appreciated the opportunity to share her music with everyone. She had a song she'd been writing, and she really enjoyed having the chance to perform at the wedding. Then I saw Edward and Kate talking. He was very nice to her, and I could tell they were both impressed with each other's work. Edward and Kate exchanged numbers, and she even thanked Nancy for having the talent show. It had really made her day, and she felt that the whole event was a great chance for her to showcase her song and connect with other musicians. She had also said how grateful she was to Nancy for giving her that chance. That's when everything changed for Nancy. After the wedding, I noticed that Nancy was starting to act really strange around Kate. She suddenly became so withdrawn. It seemed like her happiness vanished after the wedding. She wasn't as talkative or happy anymore. She started acting strange around Kate. She even acted really jealous, but she was trying to hide it. I think she didn't realize that she was acting so jealous because it was all coming out sideways. Then I noticed that she had ignored Kate's text messages. That's when I got scared, because this was unlike Nancy. I would always know exactly what she was thinking, but this was completely different. One day, she even got so upset at me for talking to Kate about Edward. I had been trying to be supportive of Kate and even told her how talented she was. She was nervous after performing at the wedding and thought Edward might be trying to get her to do something that she was not comfortable with. But she had the wrong impression of him. He just wanted to work with someone with her musical talent. I just tried to calm her down. I felt she was taking it all very seriously. I thought it would be nice to encourage her and reassure her that she was so talented. I mentioned that it would be nice if she could work with a talented producer and have her music reach a wider audience. She had some ideas for more songs and music. But Nancy completely blew up. She thought that I was trying to choose Kate over her. She went on a rant about how I shouldn't get involved with their friendship. And to be honest, I didn't really understand why she was so upset. I was so surprised by how quickly she'd changed, and it all felt so confusing. She was really angry and said I needed to take her side and told me I was wrong for not supporting her. She started shouting that she had done so much for Kate and that Kate was only successful because of her. She blamed me for not supporting her and for choosing Kate's side instead of hers. She even told me that I should block Edward on social media. She told me I should tell Edward that I didn't want him to be around her, as if she was the most important person in the world. She acted as though her feelings were the only ones that mattered. I felt that it was an awful thing to do. She didn't know how to handle the fact that Edward had reached out to Kate. I knew how great of a person he was, and I felt that her anger towards Kate was completely unreasonable. She seemed to think that her feelings trumped everyone else's and she felt threatened by her friend's new opportunity. This whole thing made me really worried about our future. We had just gotten married, and it seemed like things were only getting worse. I wasn't sure what to do. It didn't feel right to go against her, because I did love her. But her jealousy was becoming unbearable. Nancy was so mad at me for being supportive of Kate. I tried to explain to her that I wasn't choosing her over Nancy. I just wanted everyone to get along. She refused to listen, though. She kept on and on about how Kate was bragging and that everyone had ignored her poem. But I think Nancy was jealous because her poem wasn't as popular as Kate's song. The reception went on, and our friends were excited about what Kate had shared with everyone. Nancy had been upset about that, because her poem hadn't gotten as much attention. I felt she took the reception way too seriously. It seemed like a strange thing to be upset about, especially since everyone was supposed to be happy on our wedding day. I felt bad for Nancy and tried to make it better, but her behavior kept getting worse. I really didn't know what to do. She kept repeating over and over how much I was letting Kate walk all over her, and she even started asking me to block Edward and tell him that he wasn't allowed around her anymore. I refused. I thought she was crazy to do that. It seemed like it was all completely out of hand. She started ignoring our other friends who were there at the wedding, and said she didn't want to see them ever again. She even stopped talking to me. I was so upset that Nancy's jealous behavior started impacting all our friends. I tried to explain to her how unfair her behavior was, and how she should be happy for Kate. I thought her actions were so dramatic, but it didn't matter how hard I tried to reason with her. It was like I couldn't get through to her at all. Nancy was upset that I was trying to be supportive and said I was choosing her friends over her. Her behavior seemed to get worse as time passed. The day after the wedding, she decided she didn't want to go on our honeymoon. She decided she wasn't going to stay with me in the apartment. I felt so abandoned and helpless, as if she didn't care about me at all. She kept repeating that she was closer to Kate, and wanted me to take her side against Kate. She even told me that I didn't love her, and she ran off to stay with her parents. I tried to call her and send her texts. I didn't understand why she was acting like this, and I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I felt hopeless and terrified. I didn't know what to do. It seemed like she was determined to make this as difficult as possible. I felt like I was alone. I didn't even have any of our friends to turn to because she had alienated them as well. She kept insisting that I wasn't supporting her and kept saying I needed to pick a side. It was like she was trapping me. All this time, I was hoping I could talk to her and understand what was wrong. I was desperate to make her happy because I still loved her. But there was nothing I could do to get her to stop blaming Kate. She wouldn't even consider talking to a therapist to understand her feelings. She felt she was right, and it was all my fault, and I felt trapped. I didn't know who to talk to anymore. I was so alone. I was exhausted from constantly defending Kate and explaining my intentions. It all seemed hopeless, like I had just made the biggest mistake of my life by getting married. I was so afraid that my wife was falling apart. I was afraid of losing her. I was worried that our marriage was falling apart too. I even started talking to my dad, and he told me that I needed to get help and talk to someone because this was too much for me to handle alone. My dad told me to reach out to someone I trust, someone I felt comfortable with, and see if they could help me. He suggested I reach out to someone who knows me well, someone who could provide an objective viewpoint. But my dad also said he was so concerned about this, that he thought we should even consider an annulment. His suggestion was shocking. He had never been one to rush to an annulment, but it seemed like he was seeing things differently now. He said it was too unhealthy to start our marriage like this. He said I needed to make a decision because we couldn't continue to fight like this. He was right. I had to decide whether I should try to make things better or start over with my life. My dad gave me the courage to make a hard decision. It was scary and terrifying, but I knew I had to do it. I needed to do what was best for me. I didn't want to end my marriage. But what Nancy was doing didn't seem possible to fix. I felt so lost and didn't know what to do. My dad kept telling me that I needed to be honest with myself and what I wanted. My dad reminded me of everything we had gone through and said that it wasn't healthy to go on with my marriage like this. After so many weeks, Nancy finally agreed to meet me. It seemed like she was changing her mind, and I thought maybe she was ready to start talking to each other again. She agreed to meet with a therapist, and we even managed to talk for a while. We discussed everything, but she still insisted it was Kate's fault and she didn't understand why Edward would even reach out to Kate. She also said that her friends were also the reason everything had gotten out of control and were choosing her friend over her. She said she needed some time to understand everything that was going on. I understood. I didn't feel like I could force her to change. I felt helpless, but I also knew it was a good first step to finally have a conversation with her. My dad reminded me to look at things objectively and told me that my goal wasn't to fix her, but rather to do what was best for me. He encouraged me to set healthy boundaries and to protect myself, even when that meant making tough decisions. He was right. I couldn't keep letting Nancy walk all over me, and it was time I stood up for myself. So I talked to my therapist. I shared what had happened to me, and we talked about healthy boundaries and communication. My therapist told me that I had done everything I could for my marriage. She told me I had been so selfless and put my needs on hold for my wife. But I had no idea how much it would hurt me to keep going with our marriage. I thought maybe I could still save my marriage, but as time passed, things got worse. Nancy even moved out of our apartment. I didn't know how she was able to make these decisions with so much ease, especially when she hadn't even talked to her therapist. I felt sad and confused. I didn't understand why she would give up on us so easily. It didn't make sense to me. Nancy even had the nerve to post terrible things on social media about our friends and her best friend, Kate. She acted as if she was the only victim, as if everything bad that had happened was because of them. She even accused me of choosing Kate over her. I could not believe it. I never thought that she would turn into this awful, bitter person, especially since she had always been so sweet and friendly before. When I confronted her about it, she said I was being hurtful and she blamed everything on me and said I should take her side, even after the things she had done to hurt everyone. She was angry with Kate and my friends. I couldn't believe how this happened. How did someone I loved so much become so angry? Her words hurt so much. It was awful, because I still loved her, even after everything she had done. I was so confused. Why was she acting this way? What had happened to the woman I married? It made it hard to keep trusting my feelings because I was so lost and confused about her. I was worried she wouldn't be able to change. I didn't want to think about giving up on my marriage, but I couldn't keep going like this. One night, I was staring at the ceiling and trying to get to sleep, but all I could think about was Nancy and what she'd done. It felt like the entire world was against me. I wondered how this could even be possible. It felt like our whole relationship had changed into something I didn't understand. I was worried about what to do with the rest of my life. The next day, I knew I had to get some help. I felt overwhelmed. I couldn't do this alone. I didn't know what else to do, but it felt like I couldn't live my life like this. So I did something I'd never done before. I made an appointment to see a therapist. I knew this wasn't something that I could fix by myself. It wasn't going to be easy to heal from all this pain. It was time to be honest with myself about how my marriage had changed and how it affected me. I needed to face the truth, and that truth was scary. Even after the therapist, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was my fault. I couldn't escape this terrible, gut-wrenching feeling of failure and disappointment in myself. I just felt so lost and didn't know what to do anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I was the one who made a mistake. My dad reminded me to focus on myself, even after everything I had been through. He told me I should continue to heal and move on with my life. But how do you move on after something this serious? I didn't know if I would ever get over what had happened. I decided that the only way forward was to get a divorce. It felt scary to give up. It felt as if everything I'd built with Nancy had fallen apart. I needed time to heal and find myself again. I had to give myself that chance. After that, I tried to forget everything that had happened. It felt impossible at times, especially when I saw the things Nancy had written online about me and everyone else. I also felt bad for Kate, even though I knew it was not her fault. Nancy had gone out of her way to destroy Kate and her life. She had no idea that Nancy was capable of doing such a thing. All of this made me question my own perception. I hadn't understood what was going on inside her head. She wasn't who I thought she was. I hadn't realized that the woman I loved was so jealous and spiteful. I never knew how much this would hurt. My marriage was over, and it was as if a part of me was missing. It was very sad and very real. But as time passed, my feelings started to change. I began to see Nancy's actions for what they were. Her actions showed how badly she needed to change and how her jealousy and bitterness were out of control. It was still difficult to process everything that happened. But slowly but surely, I started to move on. I realized it was time to build a new life for myself, and that I needed to forgive her and forget everything she had done. I knew I was stronger than this, and that there would be better days ahead for me. It was scary to move on, but I knew it was something I had to do. I decided I would take it one day at a time and find the happiness that was still available. I couldn't let one awful experience break me. I deserved to be happy again. I had so much to look forward to.